Imagine a world where survival means hiding your very identity, where love, loss, and betrayal are painted against the backdrop of one of history's darkest horrors. The Complete Maoist isn't just a story. It's a haunting journey through memory, trauma, and resilience. What happens when a son uncovers the past his father barely survived? This isn't just history. It's a mirror reflecting who we are and how far humanity can fall or rise. Stay with us, because once you enter this story, you won't leave unchanged.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to Book Podcast Zone. I'm Emma.
And I'm John.
Ready to help us connect the dots and explore the profound implications of what we uncover today. We're embarking on a deeply moving and intensely detailed deep dive into Art Spiegelman's monumental graphic novel, The Complete Maoist.
That's right. And we've got an incredible stack of resources to guide us, really detailed chapter summaries that honestly bring this incredibly complex story to life in such a vivid way.
They really do.
Our mission today is to really unpack these sources. We want to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, the key insights, and try to understand how Spiegelman so masterfully makes these moments, these historical events, feel immediate and incredibly powerful for us here, for you listening. We're going to explore the raw human experience documented within these pages. We'll be focusing on resilience, obviously, but also the immense weight of memory, how that shapes people, and the enduring fight of the human spirit against unimaginable oppression.
It really is a journey, isn't it? It reveals not just what happened, which is crucial, of course,
Right.
but how it shaped individuals, how it rippled through generations, and importantly, how those echoes still resonate today in ways we might not always recognize.
Absolutely. And what's truly fascinating about Maoist, I think, is how it transcends being just a historical account. So much more than that.
Oh, completely. It's a profoundly personal narrative.
Yeah.
And it's filtered through this incredibly complex, sometimes really fraught relationship between a father, Vladek, and his son, Art, the author.
Yeah, that father-son dynamic is just central to the whole thing.
It is. This dual perspective isn't just, a clever storytelling device. It's absolutely central to understanding both the historical events themselves and the insidious, often hidden intergenerational impact of trauma. How the past bleeds into the present.
It adds such depth.
It really does. So you're in for a deep dive today that will, I believe, leave you truly well-informed about this incredible, vital work. It's a book that stays with you.
Definitely. Okay, let's get started. Okay, let's unpack this first chapter, the Sheik. It sets a surprisingly serene stage, doesn't it? Almost disarmingly so. But there's this subtle, unsettling feeling underneath it all.
You feel it right away.
We're introduced to Vladek Spiegelman here, the central figure.
Yeah.
But importantly, we don't meet him first as the Holocaust survivor. We meet him as this charming, ambitious young man in 1930s Poland.
Right, pre-war Poland, a different world.
Exactly. He's pursuing romance with Anja. He's building a future. He runs a business. It's this picture of, relative normalcy and optimism before his entire world just completely collapses.
And Spiegelman's genius here, I think, is starting not with the horror, which would be maybe a more obvious choice,
Right.
but with the vibrant, ordinary humanity of Vladek's pre-war life. He shows us Vladek as, a bit of a player even, the Sheik of the title.
Yeah, he's smooth.
He is, and it's such a powerful choice because it serves as this visceral argument for the humanity that was systematically erased later on. It shows us the specific loves, the ambitions, the everyday dramas, the futures that were stolen. It makes the tragedy infinitely more personal, not just a statistic.
Absolutely. It grounds everything. And that's critical because it humanizes Vladek so thoroughly from the start.
Yeah.
We see him as a whole person first, flaws and all.
Precisely. And historically, many people maybe don't realize just how incredibly vibrant and complex Jewish life in pre-war Poland really was. It wasn't monolithic.
No, not at all.
During the 1930s, Poland was home to one of Europe's largest and most dynamic Jewish communities. It was this rich tapestry of culture. You had a flourishing Yiddish theater, groundbreaking literature, active political movements spanning the spectrum.
A real hub.
A real hub, yeah. And a significant role in the economy, too. Various businesses, crafts, professions. Family life was absolutely central, often deeply rooted in religious traditions, but also adapting to modern life. This was a complete functioning society with all its internal debates and complexities, not just, a passive group waiting for tragedy to strike.
Understanding that richness really emphasizes the profound scale of the loss, doesn't it? You see what was destroyed.
Exactly. The potential extinguished.
And those traits we see in Vladek, charming and ambitious, they aren't just character details for flavor. They're actually early hints, aren't they, at the immense resourcefulness that will later be absolutely crucial for his survival.
Oh, definitely. His charisma, his drive, his, let's say, knack for figuring things out. These become vital tools for navigating utterly impossible situations later on. They're survival traits forged in a different context.
Yeah. Yet even in this era of, apparent peace and romance and business, Spiegelman masterfully conveys this subtle creep of danger.
It's there, you feel it.
It's not overt, not yet. There are no explicit warnings, really, but there's this growing tension in the atmosphere. Maybe a brief, unsettling remark someone makes, or even just a changing expression on a background character's face in one panel.
Spiegelman's visual storytelling is key here. He allows us, the readers, to infer the coming storm. It's not spelled out, which makes it almost more chilling. You pick up on these subtle cues, this background radiation of rising anti-Semitism.
So how was that actually manifesting? You mentioned the vibrancy, but what about this darker side in the 30s?
Well, even as these communities thrived, rising anti-Jewish sentiments were undeniably present and growing long before the invasion. Nazi influence from Germany began to seep across the border and manifest in insidious ways throughout Poland.
So it wasn't just a switch slipped in 39.
Not at all. You saw the spread of propaganda, often subtly at first, then more overtly, normalizing hateful ideas, making them part of public discourse. Think about things like discriminatory pamphlets, biased newspaper articles, radio broadcasts.
Poisoning the well.
Exactly. Then there were subtle legal changes, chipping away at Jewish rights. Things presented maybe as minor administrative adjustments, but cumulatively they were devastating. Restrictions on certain professions, maybe quotas in universities.
Things that seem small in isolation.
Precisely. But they add up. Social discrimination became more overt too, Jews being marginalized in public spaces, facing prejudice in professional life. And critically, economic boycotts of Jewish businesses became quite common. Signs saying don't buy from Jews, that sort of thing, aimed at crippling the community economically.
Wow. So these weren't just isolated incidents then?
No. They were part of a growing, systematic campaign, often encouraged or at least tolerated by certain segments of Polish society and government, even before the Nazis arrived in force. They created this environment where the eventual Nazi invasion in 1939, while obviously horrifying and a massive escalation,
Right.
it was built upon a foundation of existing prejudice and escalating dehumanization. These early tensions made the community vulnerable, slowly eroding their standing, their rights, their sense of security. Tragically, it set the stage for the full horror of the Holocaust.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Thinking about that time, or even moments in our own lives or history. How do we navigate life when the ground beneath us is subtly beginning to shake?
Yeah.
When those hints of coming peril are there, maybe dismissed as paranoia or exaggeration, but everyday happiness like Vladek and Anja's blossoming romance, starting a family still feels so immediate and within reach.
It's a profound question about perception, isn't it? And denial, maybe. And the human capacity to adapt or perhaps initially ignore that creeping danger because facing it is just too overwhelming.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff, right, from chapter 1.
It sets the stakes immediately.
It really does. Okay, everyone, like, subscribe, and share for more updates, and let's continue our deep dive into the next chapter. All right, moving into chapter 2, The Honeymoon. And, wow, that title itself carries such a heavy, almost cruel irony, doesn't it? Considering what we know is coming.
It really does. It hangs over the whole chapter.
Vladek and Anja's private joys, their new marriage, their life together, it's now overtly threatened by this burgeoning global catastrophe. This chapter plunges us further into their personal lives, but the backdrop is becoming increasingly ominous. It really underscores how deeply external pressures can just penetrate and devastate even the most intimate aspects of life.
The personal and the political are starting to collide directly.
Exactly. They welcome their son, Rishu. A moment that should be pure joy, right? A profound personal happiness. Yet, this happiness is immediately tinged with sorrow because Anja battles deep emotional struggles after childbirth. Postpartum depression, it seems like.
Right. A very real, very difficult personal crisis.
And it's this incredibly poignant juxtaposition. The miracle of new life, this intensely personal family moment, set against the darkening horizon of Europe in the late 1930s.
And that mirroring, that intertwining of the personal crisis and the global threat is one of Mau's most effective narrative techniques, I think.
Totally agree.
Anja's internal struggle, her vulnerability, becomes almost a microcosm of the world's unraveling. It makes the political feel deeply, inescapably personal. You can't separate them.
No, you can't. And historically, this chapter vividly reflects that geopolitical landscape of the late 1930s. What was going on then?
Well, you're talking about a period of intense Nazi aggression and expansionism. You had the Anschluss in early 1938, the annexation of Austria by Germany. Basically, Hitler just marched in.
Met with not much resistance internationally.
Worryingly little, yeah.
Mhm.
Then later that year, you had the Sudetenland crisis. Hitler demanded the German-speaking border regions of Czechoslovakia. This led to the infamous Munich Agreement.
Appeasement.
Appeasement, exactly. Britain and France basically gave Hitler what he wanted, hoping to avoid war, but of course it only emboldened him. These weren't just distant political maneuvers you read about in the paper. For people like Vladek and Anja, living in Poland, right next door.
It felt immediate.
Absolutely. They were clear, escalating acts of aggression that signaled a profound shift in Europe's stability. It was obvious a major conflict was becoming more and more likely, and for Jewish communities particularly, it felt like a direct existential threat.
Yeah. And Spiegelman uses that personal turmoil, Anja's struggles, to amplify the narrative's emotional impact. Her need for solace and a peaceful retreat, seeking treatment at a sanitarium. It's so understandable. Anyone would want that for their loved one.
Of course, place to heal.
But it carries such a heavy weight of futility in the context of the times. They're desperately trying to find this bubble of normalcy, a place for her to heal, physically and mentally. But then, the sudden jarring sight of flags of hatred waving, the swastika flags, even at this supposed peaceful retreat.
It shatters the illusion completely.
Completely. It's such a powerful image because it's not just a literal flag on a building. It's a potent symbol of an ideology, this destructive force that won't just consume their idyllic retreat, but will eventually tear apart the very fabric of their entire world.
There's no escape.
No. It's a stark reminder that some evils, some systemic hatreds, are just too pervasive to be escaped by simply moving to a different town or checking into a clinic.
And the sense of inescapable threat, this futility, was becoming the reality for many Jewish people across Europe at this time, alongside those major geopolitical shifts we talked about, like Munich. Increasing restrictions on Jewish life were eroding everyday freedoms back in Poland and elsewhere. Jewish people faced exclusion from public spaces, parks, sometimes even certain streets. Discriminatory laws were being passed, curtailing their economic activities, maybe making it harder to get licenses or barring them from certain trades.
Death by 1,000 cuts, almost.
In a way, yes. Access to education, professional opportunities, it became increasingly limited. Even basic rights, like freedom of movement, were starting to be chipped away. These weren't necessarily sudden, dramatic bans hitting everyone at once. It was often a slow, insidious erosion designed to confine, isolate, and demoralize Jewish communities.
Making life harder and harder.
Exactly. So Vladek's memory, as Spiegelman conveys it, focuses not just on the events, but on the emotional impact, the growing sense of dread, that chilling realization that their attempts to find solace or maintain normalcy were becoming futile against an enemy that respected no boundaries, personal or national. It was the feeling of what was coming, the closing walls that he remembered most vividly, I think.
This chapter truly hits home, doesn't it? The idea that personal happiness can be incredibly fragile. It's vulnerable not just to our own internal struggles, like Anja's illness, but to these overwhelming external systemic threats. It really challenges you to consider, how might we react? How might you react when your most intimate moments, your family life, your personal crises, are overshadowed by such immense societal change, by rising hatred?
It's hard to imagine.
It is. How much resilience does it truly take to sustain joy, or even just basic hope, when the world around you is darkening so relentlessly and those symbols of hate are appearing even in places meant for healing?
A profound question with no easy answers.
None at all. Okay, let's take a breath, like, subscribe, and share for more updates, and let's move on to the next chapter. All right, Chapter 3, Prisoner of War. And here, any sense of tranquility, even the fragile kind we saw on the honeymoon, just shatters completely. The war explodes onto the page.
Yeah, the dam breaks.
It rips Vladek from his domestic life, from Anja and baby Rishu, and throws him into this brutal, impersonal conflict. This is where we see the stark, immediate impact of the Nazi invasion of Poland in September 1939. not just on a nation abstractly, but on one individual life, Vladek's life.
From husband and father to soldier in an instant.
Exactly. He's abruptly thrust into the role of a soldier in the Polish army, and then almost as quickly, a prisoner of war. He's fighting not for some grand notion of his country's glory, but for his sheer existence from moment one.
And it's an incredibly abrupt and brutal transition that Spiegelman captures so well. Historically, that 1939 Nazi invasion of Poland was shocking in its swiftness and brutality. It was the debut of the Blitzkrieg, the Lightning War.
Right, a new kind of warfare.
Totally new. German forces overwhelmed Polish defenses with these highly coordinated air and ground attacks, panzer divisions punching through lines, Luftwaffe dominating the skies. It led to a quick defeat of the Polish forces much faster than many observers, including the Poles themselves, had anticipated.
And Vladek is caught right in the middle of that chaos. He describes the fighting being captured.
And thrust into a grueling prisoner camp. Now, his previous resourcefulness, that charm and ambition we saw in Chapter 1, the business dealings, it takes on a completely new, desperate form.
Survival mode kicks in.
Big time. The source notes talk about him clinging to dreams and clever trades. Those dreams aren't just idle fantasies, they're vital mental escapes. Picturing Anja, Richu, a future beyond the barbed wire, anything to counter the despair and provide a reason to endure the hardship.
Keeping that human connection alive in his mind.
Exactly. And the clever trades. His ingenuity, whether it's figuring out how to barter for a slightly better piece of bread, mending shoes for guards, maybe using his language skills, Polish, Yiddish, German, maybe some English, that becomes his currency for survival.
Little advantages.
Tiny advantages that mean everything. These aren't moral choices in a normal sense anymore. They're desperate acts born of extreme necessity, just focused on staying alive another day, getting through the harsh labor, the bitter cold.
And what were conditions like in those early POW camps?
They were incredibly brutal, Emma. Thousands of captured Polish soldiers, including many Jewish individuals like Vladek, suffered under horrific conditions right from the start of the war.
Before the concentration camps were fully established even.
Well, the concentration camp system existed, but these early POW camps specifically held soldiers captured in battle. They faced severe starvation. Rations were minimal, often just watery soup and bread. Illness was rampant due to exposure to the bitter Polish winters, lack of proper clothing, terrible sanitation, and virtually no medical care.
Just left to suffer.
Pretty much. Forced labor was common, pushing prisoners to their physical limits on pointless or dangerous tasks. And crucially, reflecting Nazi ideology from the absolute outset, racial segregation within the camps often meant Jewish prisoners endured even harsher treatment, worse conditions, and more brutality from the guards than non-Jewish Polish POWs.
So discrimination even within that hell.
Absolutely. These early experiences for soldiers like Vladek really set the tone for the systematic dehumanization and violence that would define the Holocaust. They served as an early, grim indicator of the regime's utter disregard for human life, especially Jewish life.
So eventually Vladek is released from the POW camp, but as Maus makes painfully clear, this offered no true safety for a Jewish man in Nazi-occupied Poland.
Not at all. It was a fleeting freedom, as the source describes it, a return to a reality that was now fraught with new, terrifying unknowns. It was really just a different kind of imprisonment outside the barbed wire, but under Nazi rule.
So there was no joyful homecoming, no relief.
No, the reunion with Anja, while obviously emotional, was tense. It was a reunion into deeper uncertainty, not peace. The chaos of battle gave way to the insidious, systematic oppression that was just beginning to take root across Poland. He was out of the frying pan.
And into the fire.
Exactly. He was free from one cage, the POW camp, only to find himself in a much larger, more terrifying one Nazi-occupied Poland, where the rules were fluid, arbitrary, unpredictable, and the threat of violence and death was constant and rapidly growing. The war's brutal start for Vladek was truly only the prelude.
This chapter really makes you consider that fundamental human drive for survival. How even in the most desperate circumstances imaginable, ingenuity, hope, clinging to those dreams, they can be catalysts for endurance.
The will to live.
Yeah, but it also forces us, you listening, to confront how quickly freedom can just vanish, how a familiar world can be replaced almost overnight by a terrifying new reality. What would you do when everything you know is ripped away and your very existence becomes this daily agonizing struggle?
It's chilling to contemplate.
It really is. Okay, folks, like, subscribe, and share for more updates, and we'll continue to the next chapter. Okay, next up is Chapter 4, The Noose Tightens. That title says it all, really. Here we witness the systematic dismantling of Jewish life in occupied Poland, the initial shock of war, the chaos of invasion and capture. It now gives way to this grinding, inescapable, calculated oppression.
It's a shift from the overt violence of the battlefield to the administrative violence of Nazi policy. Equally deadly, just colder.
Exactly. This chapter marks a grim, inexorable progression. The illusion of any return to normalcy, even the constrained normalcy Vladek returned to after the POW camp, is just shattered. Jewish communities are being systematically isolated, deprived, controlled. We're moving from the battlefield to the chilling, bureaucratic processes of destruction.
It's a terrifying shift because it illustrates the cold, methodical machinery of genocide taking shape. Historically, this chapter aligns perfectly with the early 1940s in occupied Poland. This is the period when Nazi policies forcing Jews into ghettos were systematically implemented across the country.
Like the Warsaw Ghetto, lots.
Exactly. Those are the most infamous examples, but there were hundreds of ghettos established in cities and towns. The purpose behind herding families into these cramped quarters, as the source puts it, was multifaceted.
It wasn't just about separation.
No, it was about control, first and foremost, making it easier to monitor and police the Jewish population. It was about systematic plunder, confiscating Jewish property and businesses outside the ghetto walls. And it was about creating a concentrated, vulnerable labor pool that could be brutally exploited for the German war effort.
Holding pens, essentially.
Holding pens designed to break spirit and body. These weren't neighborhoods, they were prisons, often walled off, designed for slow starvation and disease, even before the deportations began in earnest. They were a deliberate step towards extermination.
And the narrative vividly portrays families herded into cramped quarters, multiple families sharing single rooms, resources dwindling daily, food becoming scarce, medicine impossible to get, fuel for heating running out.
It's a deliberate strategy. Isolate, dehumanize, weaken them physically, weaken them psychologically, make them easier targets for the next stage.
And in these utterly desperate conditions, Vladek's increasing reliance on black market deals reveals so much about his character, but also about the complete breakdown of normal society.
Survival demanded it.
It shows his desperate love for his family, right? Driving him to take immense risks, sneaking out of the ghetto maybe, dealing with dangerous people just to procure a little extra food, some medicine, anything.
He's still fighting, just in a different way.
But it also highlights the profound moral ambiguities of survival. In a world where all legal avenues for sustenance, for life itself, are deliberately closed off to you, what was once considered illicit, maybe even immoral in peacetime, becomes an absolute necessity. It blurs those ethical lines, doesn't it? All for the sake of keeping your loved ones alive.
The normal rules just don't apply anymore. And within these ghettos, life was defined by incredibly severe restrictions. Curfews, obviously, often from dusk till dawn. But also prohibitions on leaving the ghetto boundaries without special permission, which was rarely granted.
Trapped.
Completely trapped. Forbidden from owning property outside the ghetto, often barred from practicing professions they'd trained for their whole lives. Access to food, medicine, fuel, as you said, was severely restricted by the Germans, leading to widespread starvation, malnutrition, and devastating outbreaks of diseases like typhus.
Engineered misery.
It was. These policies were meticulously designed to isolate, humiliate, degrade, and slowly kill the Jewish population even before the gas chambers became the primary method. It's a process of systematic dehumanization, stripping away everything that makes life bearable, let alone meaningful.
And the source uses this critical phrase, heartbreaking choices loom, that really jumps out. It makes you think about the unimaginable dilemmas individuals and families faced constantly.
Every day was a minefield of impossible choices.
Who do you try to protect when resources are so scarce? Who gets the last piece of bread? Who do you risk everything to hide if the deportations start? Who do you potentially have to leave behind if there's a chance, however slim, for some to escape?
Agonizing.
And making the agonizing decision between complying with seemingly minor orders like registering with the authorities, which often led directly to deportation versus resisting, which could mean immediate execution for you and your family.
Often made under extreme duress, with incomplete or deliberately false information from the Nazis. And the outcomes were almost always devastating, regardless of the choice.
This chapter, The Noose Tightens, also powerfully portrays the erosion of hope and the desperate scramble to hold on to dignity. How do those two concepts interact? Can you have dignity without hope?
That's a deep question. Maybe not dignity in its fullest sense, the sense we understand in peacetime, but even in the face of absolute despair, Emma, these quiet acts of resistance, they were a form of holding on to dignity. Sharing a crust of bread when you have nothing. Maintaining religious practices in secret, risking death to do so. Trying to educate children in hidden schools, just preserving family bonds, showing love and care in that environment, simply refusing to completely give up internally, even when everything externally is designed to crush you. These were ways to hold on to a semblance of self-worth, of humanity. Dignity became this internal fortress against the external efforts to annihilate it.
Wow. Finding dignity in the smallest acts.
Sometimes that's all that was left. And historically, this ghetto period was also tragically marking the beginning of the mass deportations to camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau.
The next horrifying step.
Yes. The initial pretense offered by the Nazis was often resettlement to the east or assignment to labor camps. Lies, of course.
You keep people compliant.
Exactly. To minimize resistance during the roundups. But the horrific reality, which quickly became undeniable through escape rumors or the sheer finality of the disappearances, was that these were transports to extermination camps. These deportations began in earnest around 1942 and accelerated rapidly. By the end of the war, as the source grimly notes, millions would perish in these camps. The scale of it, millions, it's almost impossible to truly comprehend. It underscores the systematic industrial nature of the genocide now fully underway. The noose wasn't just tightening, it was actively strangling.
This chapter forces you, the listener, to confront that slow, agonizing process of systematic dehumanization. It asks, how do you maintain your humanity? How do you protect your loved ones when every single societal structure is designed to break you down piece by piece, when every choice comes with an unimaginable, potentially fatal cost?
It's a harrowing examination of the human spirit's breaking point.
But also, maybe, its incredible, desperate capacity for resilience, even as hope seems to completely evaporate.
Even then.
Heavy. Okay, everyone, deep breath. Like, subscribe, and share for more updates, and we'll continue to the next chapter. All right, Chapter 5, and the title alone, Mouse Holes, tells you everything about how desperate the situation has become. Hiding isn't just an option anymore, it's a terrifying, absolute necessity for survival.
The world outside has become the predator.
Exactly. The walls are closing in, literally and figuratively. The strategies for survival shift entirely from navigating the increasingly deadly rules of the ghetto to absolute concealment, disappearing from view entirely. This chapter marks a profound descent into the literal underworld of occupied Poland, where existence itself becomes this closely guarded, precarious secret.
It's an incredibly claustrophobic and terrifying period that Spiegelman depicts. Historically, this chapter vividly captures the brutal reality of the 1943 ghetto liquidations that swept across Poland.
So, the Nazis decided to empty the ghettos completely.
Yes. This was a deliberate Nazi policy of clearing out entire communities, systematically emptying the ghettos of their remaining inhabitants. The primary targets were often the elderly, the sick, and children, anyone deemed unproductive or unable to work for the German war machine. But ultimately, the goal was everyone.
How did they do it?
The methods were utterly ruthless. Mass roundups, often incredibly violent, block-by-block searches, forced marches to collection points, and then immediate deportations, usually straight to extermination camps like Treblinka or Auschwitz. The explicit goal was to make these areas, Judenrein, free of Jews, to leave no Jewish presence, eradicating them completely from the landscape.
Horrifying.
Yeah.
And so, hiding becomes a way of life, as the source says. A life lived in constant shadow, devoid of light, literally and metaphorically.
The psychological toll must have been immense.
Unimaginable. The pervasive gnawing fear of discovery, every creak of the floorboards, every unfamiliar voice outside, the relentless anxiety, the profound loss of privacy, crammed into tiny spaces with others, and the sheer physical and mental exhaustion of living in a perpetual darkness, often underground, within these secret bunkers and shadowed corners.
Bunkers, attics, cellars, hidden compartments behind false walls.
Often with terrible sanitation, lack of fresh air, limited food and water, and always the constant threat of informers or neighbors betraying them or sudden Nazi raids. It's almost impossible to truly conceive of that existence.
And tragically, it's during this time, this period of desperate hiding, that the unimaginable loss strikes Vladek and Anja directly and personally, the death of their young son, Rishu.
Oh, that part is just devastating. How did it happen?
He wasn't with them when they went into hiding. They had sent him, along with other children, to what they thought was a safer place, entrusted to relatives in another town. But that ghetto was liquidated too, and the woman looking after him, rather than let the children fall into the hands of the Nazis, she poisoned them and herself.
Oh my God. An impossible, horrifying
It's
choice.
an act of terrible love, perhaps, in the face of ultimate evil. For Vladek and Anja, finding out later, it's an unspeakable, irreversible trauma. A wound that, you can tell from Vladek's telling, never, ever heals.
Never. And for us, the readers, this profoundly personal tragedy amplifies the broader horror of the Holocaust like nothing else. It transforms those abstract statistics, the millions, into the specific, visceral grief of individual parents.
It makes the abstract evil undeniably real, concrete, and deeply felt. It illustrates the devastating personal cost of this systematic violence in a way numbers never could.
It's a moment that beautifully, yet so painfully, explores that duality the source mentions. The depths of despair and the fierce will to protect family. How can such profound despair coexist with such a powerful will to survive, to protect those who remain?
It's a paradox, isn't it? But maybe it's the very depth of that despair, the searing pain of loss, or the imminent threat of more loss, that fuels this fierce protection. It ignites an almost superhuman resolve, an instinctual primal drive to shield those who remain, in this case, each other, against this indifferent, murderous world. Hope might be gone, but the will to endure for the sake of the other persists.
Yeah. And in this desperate context, hiding in these mouse holes, those small alliances and quick thinking become absolutely vital. They're lifelines.
Often the only lifelines. These brief moments of help, maybe from a righteous Gentile risking their own life, or from other Jews sharing a hiding spot or information, or Vladek's constant ingenuity in finding food or bribing someone, these were often the only things providing that fleeting shelter, that chance to survive just one more day, one more hour.
It relied so much on trust, in a time when trust was so dangerous.
Incredibly dangerous. As the ghettos were liquidated, the few survivors were forced into these underground networks or risky escapes. These networks were often informal, highly precarious, relying on trusted contacts, smugglers, or sympathetic non-Jews who took enormous risks.
What did escape look like?
It could mean hiding in forests, living rough, hiding in barns, attics, cellars, sometimes even sewers for months or years. The dangers were immense, including, as the source mentions, widespread betrayal and famine.
Betrayal was common.
Tragically, yes. Betrayal by informers, sometimes motivated by anti-Semitism, sometimes by greed. The Germans offered rewards. Sometimes by fear was a constant lethal threat. And famine was endemic for those in hiding, cut off from any regular source of food or supplies. The constant threat and the reality of betrayal profoundly shaped the mindset of those trying to survive. It bred deep distrust, forcing individuals to be constantly vigilant, suspicious, making connection itself a risk.
This chapter forces you to imagine those impossible choices, the physical and psychological torture of constant hiding, and the profound, shattering grief of losing a child in such a brutal, indirect way.
Yeah.
It asks, what are the limits of human endurance? And how do you find the will to live when everything you hold dear is systematically ripped away?
It's a testament, I think, to the raw, visceral power of the human spirit, or perhaps just the survival instinct to cling to life, even when life offers nothing but darkness and suffering.
Unbelievable strength.
Okay.
Like, subscribe, and share for more updates, and let's continue to the next and final chapter of Part 1, okay, Chapter 6, Mousetrap. And if Mouse Holes was about desperate survival and hiding, this chapter is where that strategy fails. Any fleeting hope, any illusion of control is tragically extinguished here.
The trap springs shut.
Exactly. Vladek and Anja face the ultimate betrayal, the one that leads them directly, finally, into the very heart of the nightmare, Auschwitz. This chapter is a crushing blow. It signals the end of any possibility of local survival, the end of hiding, and the beginning of that inexorable journey into the maw of the Holocaust's most infamous symbol.
All their efforts, all their hiding in bunkers, all their cleverness, their bribes, their risks, it all culminates in this tragic moment of capture. It feels inevitable in retrospect, but reading it is still devastating.
And this aligns with a particularly grim period in the Holocaust, doesn't it? The mid-1944 escalations. Why were things intensifying even more right then?
Well, several factors converged in mid-1944 as the war was clearly turning against Germany, with Allied forces advancing on both the Eastern and Western fronts after D-Day.
Right, the Normandy landings.
Exactly. The Nazis, in a desperate, almost fanatical attempt to complete their final solution before defeat, accelerated their extermination efforts. They knew their time was limited. So the motivations were twofold. liquidate the remaining Jewish populations, particularly the huge Hungarian Jewish community, which was targeted in 1944, as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Before the Allies could liberate them.
Precisely. And also, increasingly, to destroy the evidence of their atrocities, dismantling killing facilities, burning documents, trying to erase the crime itself. It was a race against time for them, driven by ideology and a desire to hide their guilt.
And the weight of betrayal in this specific capture is immense. The narrative describes how betrayal snaps like a trap. They paid smugglers, people they trusted, to get them to safety in Hungary.
And the smugglers turned them right over to the Gestapo.
Yeah. In an environment where every external force is already hostile, the few individuals one places trust in become absolute lifelines. When those lifelines are severed by such a calculated act of betrayal, it shatters not just physical safety, but one's capacity for trust itself, doesn't it?
It's a wound that goes far deeper than physical capture. It confirms the absolute precariousness of their existence and the terrifying moral collapse of the society around them. There's nowhere safe, no one reliable.
And this moment is also about stripping away illusions. Whatever remaining hope Vladek and Anja might have clung to, hope of controlling their fate through ingenuity, hope that maybe things wouldn't get that bad, hope that their cleverness would ultimately save them, is just violently extinguished.
Yeah.
The trap wasn't just the smugglers, it was the realization that there was no way out through their own efforts anymore.
And this period, mid-1944, especially with the Hungarian deportations, led to the deportation of hundreds of thousands more people to Auschwitz. Historically, Auschwitz, or more accurately Auschwitz-Birkenau, is tragically synonymous with the Holocaust industrial-scale murder.
Why Auschwitz specifically?
It was the largest of the German Nazi concentration and extermination camps, a vast, sprawling complex designed for systematic, bureaucratic, and horrifically efficient murder. It had multiple subcamps for forced labor, but Birkenau, Auschwitz II, was primarily built as a killing center with huge gas chambers and crematoria. Its reputation, even among those being transported there, was one of dread, a place whispered about as a final destination.
And the reality.
The reality was even more horrific than most could imagine. A systematic process of selections upon arrival on the infamous ramp SS doctors making instant life or death decisions. Immediate gassing for the vast majority deemed unfit for labor, children, the elderly, the sick, many women. Brutal forced labor for those selected to live temporarily. Deliberate starvation, rampant disease, constant terror, torture, and medical experiments under the SS guards. It was quite literally a factory of death.
And Maus describes, the journey to Auschwitz begins, stripping away illusions and thrusting them into a nightmare of separation and suffering. That journey itself.
That journey represents the complete loss of even the minimal agency they had while hiding, from being active participants in their own survival, however precarious.
Right, making choices, finding hiding places.
They become passive victims again, cargo packed into cattle cars, transported against their will, their future entirely in the hands of an inhumane system. Their names replaced by numbers upon arrival. It's the ultimate dehumanization.
Yet even at this absolute lowest point, on the train, facing the abyss, the theme of family connection, Vladek and Anja trying to stay together, the unyielding push to reunite even if separated, it persists.
It's such a powerful assertion of humanity in a place and on a journey designed to crush it entirely. It provides a purpose beyond mere physical survival, a reason to keep going. It shows that love, that connection can endure even in the face of unimaginable evil.
And that initial journey itself, the transport, contributed significantly to the raw terror of the unknown that Spiegelman captures so powerfully, right?
Absolutely. Packed tightly into sealed cattle cars, sometimes for days on end. No food, no water, no sanitation. Standing room only. The stench, the fear, the crying, the dying. People had only rumors, fragmented whispers, and their own horrifying imaginations to fuel their fears about the destination.
Auschwitz was known, but not fully comprehended.
Exactly. Its full horror was truly unimaginable until you arrived. This journey was deliberately designed by the Nazis to break spirits, to degrade, to dehumanize, and to instill absolute terror before they even set foot inside the camp gates. Soften them up for the slaughter, essentially.
This chapter is such a stark reminder of that fragile line between hope and despair, and how easily trust can be shattered, leading to the most unimaginable consequences.
The finality of it is terrifying.
It really challenges you, the listener, to consider the immense courage it takes to hold on to any semblance of hope, any connection, when everything, absolutely everything, points to certain doom. It's a story that forces us to reckon with the profound power of betrayal, but also the enduring, yet incredibly vulnerable nature of human connection right up to the gates of hell.
The point of no return.
But yeah.
Wow. Okay, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll dive into part 2. And here my troubles began. Like, subscribe, and share for more updates, and we'll be right back.
Welcome back to Book Podcast Zone. We're diving into part 2 of Art Spiegelman's The Complete Mouse, starting with chapter 1, starkly titled Mauschwitz.
Yeah, that title hits you immediately.
It really does. It's harrowing. It drops us directly into the absolute heart of hell, Auschwitz itself. And that title, that brilliant, disturbing portmanteau combining the familiar, almost childlike animal metaphor, mouse, with the unspeakable reality of Auschwitz, it instantly signals Spiegelman's unique, unsettling approach.
It tells you this isn't going to be a straightforward historical account. It's filtered through memory, through metaphor, through trauma. It's deeply personal and tragically surreal all at once.
Exactly. It prepares you for a different kind of telling. Now, Heart of Hell is truly not hyperbole when describing Auschwitz, is it?
No, sadly it is not.
Yeah.
Historically, the period Vladek arrives, likely in mid to late 1944, sees Auschwitz operations at their absolute peak. The camp complex was running at full, horrifying capacity. Transports were arriving daily from across occupied Europe, Hungary, Poland, France, Italy, Greece.
A truly continental scale.
Industrial scale. Prisoners faced constant selections on the arrival ramp, as we mentioned, and sometimes even within the camp later on. SS doctors making those instant life-or-death decisions, left for labor, right for the gas chambers. It was arbitrary, terrifying.
And survival was precarious even if you were selected for labor.
Extremely. Starvation was a deliberate policy, part of the extermination through labor strategy. Rations were designed to be insufficient to sustain life long term. Labor under the SS guards and capos, prisoner overseers, was brutal, often pointless, exhausting, and incredibly dangerous, designed to wear people down and kill them slowly. Disease was rampant typhus, dysentery.
And Auschwitz became synonymous with the Holocaust's industrial-scale murder, precisely because of this systematic, bureaucratic, highly efficient method for extermination. The gas chambers, the crematoria operating nonstop.
It was a factory designed for killing human beings. The calculated cruelty of it is staggering.
And within this absolute horror, Vladek's daily fight for survival unfolds. Amidst these dehumanizing routines designed to strip prisoners of their identity, their very personhood.
Reduced to numbers.
Literally, tattooed on their arms, their names irrelevant. Shaved heads, ill-fitting striped uniforms, the constant assault on their dignity, treating them worse than animals. It's a place where Vladek's resourcefulness, that quality we saw glimpses of earlier, is now completely redefined. It's stripped down to its most essential form.
It's pure survival instinct now.
Trading skills for scraps, as the source puts it. It becomes this new, far more desperate form of survival. Before, in business, it was maybe about getting ahead, making a profit. In the ghetto, it was about getting vital necessities. Now in Auschwitz,
It's about staying alive for one more hour, one more day.
his skills like knowing how to repair shoes, which he learned, or knowing multiple languages for translation, or maybe his experience in textiles, they aren't just practical anymore. They become his literal lifeline.
They give him value, however temporary, to the guards or capos. Maybe get him a slightly better work detail, indoors perhaps, away from the worst brutality. Or an extra piece of bread, a slightly cleaner bit of clothing.
Tiny advantages in a system designed for total equality in death.
Exactly. These were life-saving transactions, however small they seem. His ability to organize, to trade, to make himself useful in some small way, that becomes his art of survival in Mauschwitz.
And those tiny advantages were absolutely critical, weren't they? Because the daily reality was just unimaginable.
Unimaginable. The constant threat of random violence from guards or capos, the pervasive gnawing hunger that drove people to madness, the bitter cold in winter, the mud, the lice, rampant disease spreading like wildfire, and the constant sight and smell of death all around the crematoria smoke, the bodies. It was the very fabric of their existence.
So Vladek's survival strategies, his trades, his language skills, his meticulousness, even his sometimes grating personality traits maybe helped him navigate that hierarchy.
They weren't just clever. They were desperate adaptations to an utterly hostile environment where any tiny edge could mean the difference between life and death. In a place where all human dignity was systematically attacked, finding ways to assert even minimal control, secure minimal resources, was everything.
And amidst this unparalleled horror, this daily struggle for a crust of bread, Vladek is still plotting ways to glimpse Anja. She's in Birkenau, the women's camp nearby.
That determination is incredible.
It really highlights the enduring power of human connection, of love, amidst the most brutal separation imaginable. Why was maintaining that connection, even just seeing her across the wire, so vital for their spirits?
Because it provided a purpose beyond mere physical survival. It was a reminder of who they were before, of the life they had, of the humanity the Nazis were trying to erase. Seeing each other, exchanging a smuggled note, knowing the other was still alive. It was an act of profound resistance against the camp's design to isolate and destroy all human bonds.
A flicker of hope.
A desperate reminder of who they were, what they had lost, and maybe, just maybe, what they might still have if they could somehow miraculously hold on. It fueled the will to live for each other.
And this chapter is also where that narrative's dual timeline, the story being told in the present, becomes particularly poignant. The source mentions present-day tensions with his son, Art. How do these lingering scars on relationships directly stem from these past horrors Vladek is recounting?
It's crucial because it shows the Holocaust didn't end in 1945 for the survivors. Vladek's experiences in Auschwitz shaped him profoundly, irrevocably. They made him the complex, often difficult man he is in his old age when Art is interviewing him.
His behaviors in the present make more sense.
Exactly. His hoarding tendencies, saving scraps of string, obsessing over money, his deep-seated anxieties, his sometimes harsh prejudices, even against other groups, his difficult relationship with his second wife, Mala. These are all arguably direct echoes of his past trauma, coping mechanisms that were necessary for survival then, but became ingrained maladaptive behaviors later.
And Art has to deal with that.
Yes. Art, as his son, inherits not just the story, the historical record, but the emotional residue, the fallout. It creates this complex generational gap, this dynamic filled with love, yes, but also immense frustration, guilt, and misunderstanding. Vladek survived, but he didn't survive unchanged, and that impacts everyone around him. It's a powerful, painful illustration of intergenerational trauma.
This chapter asks you, the listener, to imagine the sheer, unbelievable will required to stay human, or even just alive, when everything around you is designed to strip that humanity away.
The daily calculus of survival.
Yeah. And it also subtly introduces this incredibly important idea that survival itself carries an immense burden. It's not a simple victory. It echoes through generations, shaping not just the individual survivor, but their entire family legacy, their relationships. What does it mean to survive when the cost of that survival is etched so deeply into your very being and then consciously or unconsciously passed down?
A heavy, heavy question that Malleus forces us to confront.
It does. Okay. Like, subscribe, and share for more updates, and let's continue to the next chapter. All right, chapter 2 of part 2, and the title here is Auschwitz. Time flies, that parenthetical. It tells us something profound about memory, doesn't it? And how we process or fail to process unimaginable events.
Time warps under trauma, that's exactly what it suggests.
Vladek continues recounting the relentless grind of camp life here, the day-to-day horrors. But crucially, Spiegelman layers this historical account with the present-day struggles of Art, the son, as he attempts to comprehend, document, and frankly just cope with the immense weight of these tales his father is telling him.
The title is so evocative because it captures that distortion. For Vladek, living through it, the days in the camp could feel both absolutely endless, this monotonous, terrifying cycle of hunger, labor, fear, and death.
Never ending.
And yet, looking back, maybe large chunks of time, entire periods of unspeakable horror collapse into fragmented recollections. Time speeds up in memory, or maybe certain periods are just black holes. It flies, but it also crawls. It's paradoxical.
And that distortion, that nonlinear nature of traumatic memory, makes it incredibly difficult for his son, Art, to fully grasp the experience, right? How do you step into someone else's shoes and understand the true duration, the sequence, the feeling of such an ordeal when memory itself is fractured?
You can't, not fully. And Art's struggle with that limitation is part of the story Mouse tells. It's about the limits of empathy, the gaps between generations, the impossibility of truly conveying such extreme experience.
Historically, this chapter seems to cover the later stages of Vladek's time in Auschwitz, leading up towards the end of the war. What was happening then?
Right, we're likely in late 1944 to early 1945. This was a critical phase as the Allied forces were making significant advances on both the eastern and western fronts. The Soviets were pushing relentlessly from the east, getting closer and closer to Auschwitz itself, which was in occupied Poland.
Putting pressure on the Nazis.
Immense pressure. From the west, after D-Day, the British, American, and other Allied forces were pushing through France and towards Germany. This directly impacted Nazi strategy within the camps. They became even more desperate.
How so?
As the Soviets approached, the Nazis began a frantic effort to evacuate the eastern camps, including Auschwitz. Their goals were multiple: prevent the Allied forces from liberating tens of thousands of prisoners who could bear witness to their crimes.
Hide the evidence.
Exactly. Destroy the evidence, dismantle the killing apparatus, and also try to move prisoners deeper into Germany, into the Reich proper, to continue exploiting their slave labor for the collapsing war effort as long as humanly possible. It was chaotic, brutal, and utterly desperate.
And Vladek's account here includes these horrific tasks like dismantling death machines, the gas chambers, the crematoria.
Yes, this is an act of profound, sickening irony, forcing the victims, the prisoners, to destroy the very evidence of the atrocities committed against them and millions of others.
Making them participate in their own erasure.
It's horrifying. This task, forced upon Sonderkommando units, Jewish prisoners forced to work in the gas chambers and crematoria, and sometimes other prisoners in the final stages of the camp's operation, was a desperate Nazi attempt to hide their crimes as the Allies closed in. It forced the victims to become these unwilling participants in the erasure of their own suffering and the evidence of genocide, adding another layer of unimaginable psychological torment.
And then there's dodging death marches. What exactly were these?
As the Nazis evacuated camps like Auschwitz ahead of the advancing armies, they forced the remaining prisoners, those deemed fit enough to walk, on these brutal forced marches westward, deeper into Germany.
Why not just leave them? Or kill them all there?
They did kill many, but they also wanted to keep the usable slave labor moving and crucially prevent them from falling into Allied hands alive. These weren't evacuations for safety. They were death marches by design. Thousands upon thousands of prisoners, already emaciated, sick, weakened by years of abuse.
Forced to walk in winter.
Exactly. Forced to walk for days, sometimes weeks, in freezing temperatures, often with little or no food, water, or proper clothing. Guards shot anyone who lagged behind, collapsed from exhaustion, or tried to escape. Consequently, as the source notes, many perished from exhaustion and exposure, or outright murder. It was another form of mass killing, adding countless more victims in the final, chaotic months of the war.
So Vladek's strategies for avoiding or surviving them, what would those have involved?
Luck played a huge role, obviously, but also maybe quick thinking, finding a place to hide during the evacuation chaos, feigning illness convincingly at the right moment, maybe using his skills again to secure a place on a slightly less brutal train transport instead of marching, or simply having the physical endurance somehow to keep going when others couldn't. It was a deadly lottery.
And it's during these harrowing recounts, these descriptions of the absolute depth, that Spiegelman includes this powerful meta-commentary. Art, the author character, struggling with the challenge of turning pain into art.
Yeah, the frame breaks, in a way.
It explores the immense ethical and emotional complexities for Art as he tries to translate his father's unimaginable pain into this graphic novel format. We see him slumped over his drawing board, feeling overwhelmed, even guilty.
He grapples with immense survivor's guilt, not his own survival, but guilt about profiting, in a sense, from his parents' suffering, guilt about the very act of representation, the fear of misrepresenting or trivializing his father's story, of getting it wrong.
Can he ever really capture it?
That's the question he asks himself. And the emotional toll is obvious. Immersing himself day after day in these horrific details takes a heavy psychological price. The act of storytelling, for Art, becomes a form of processing, maybe even a form of healing for his own inherited trauma, a way to connect with his father.
But it's also a heavy burden.
An immense burden, yeah. It demands incredible emotional labor and constant ethical consideration to ensure the story is told with integrity, with respect, without exploiting the suffering it depicts. Mass is as much about the difficulty of telling a story as it is about the story itself.
And those flashes of liberation, teasing hope near the end, they were often mixed with more danger.
Absolutely. As the front lines shifted rapidly, the chaos and desperation of the retreating Nazis could be even more lethal than the organized cruelty of the camps. Prisoners faced intensified brutality, random killings by guards trying to eliminate witnesses, and also the dangers of Allied aerial bombardments, as the Allies often didn't know exactly where prisoner callers were. It was this terrible paradox. The very dawn of freedom, the approach of liberators, often came hand in hand with the highest risk of immediate death.
This chapter really makes you consider the complex nature of memory itself, how it's shaped, how it's distorted by trauma, how it's passed down imperfectly through generations.
And the weight of that inheritance.
Yeah. It challenges you to think about the profound responsibility of bearing witness to someone else's trauma. and the ethical considerations involved in sharing such profoundly personal, painful stories. What does it truly mean to remember? And what is our role as listeners, as readers, in ensuring such memories are not lost or forgotten, especially when they are so painful to revisit, even secondhand?
Mouse doesn't offer easy answers, but it forces us to ask the questions.
It certainly does. Okay, like, subscribe, and share for more updates, and let's move on to the next chapter. Okay, chapter 3 of part 2, and the title. And Here My Troubles Began. It's perhaps the most ironic, the most profound, and honestly the most heartbreaking title in the entire book.
It stops you in your tracks, doesn't it, after Auschwitz? Now the troubles begin.
Exactly. After surviving the unimaginable horror of Auschwitz, after enduring everything we've just discussed, Vladek faces new, unexpected challenges that lead him to say this is where his troubles began. It highlights such a critical, often overlooked truth about survival.
That the end of the war, the end of the camps, did not mean the end of suffering.
Not even close. Instead, for Vladek and so many others, it was simply the beginning of a different, insidious, prolonged form of struggle. It's a shocking realization for us, the listeners, that the worst, what we assume must have been the absolute nadir of human experience, was somehow not the end of his ordeal.
And that profound irony is absolutely central to understanding the survivor's experience, Emma. It speaks volumes about how survival doesn't equate to peace or relief even. It often introduces new forms of suffering, physical, psychological, emotional.
So the troubles just changed form.
Precisely. Vladek had escaped the immediate threat of the gas chambers, the daily terror of Auschwitz. But now he faced the prolonged agony of physical collapse disease contracted on the death marches, the long-term effects of starvation, and the profound, inescapable trauma of his experiences, which would manifest in countless ways later. His troubles were no longer just about avoiding instant death, but about living with the indelible, crippling marks of what he endured, a battle that, in many ways, would continue for the rest of his life.
And this is vividly brought to life in the chapter through Vladek's account of that brutal death march from Auschwitz. He describes it as a frozen ordeal, and the horrific conditions of transport that followed in open cattle cars again, packed trains, ending up in other squalid camps like Dachau.
Dachau, near Munich, one of the very first Nazi concentration camps, now overflowing and ridden with disease at the war's end.
It highlights what made these marches and transports so deadly, even as the war was clearly ending. Why were they still so lethal?
Because the Nazis showed utter disregard for the prisoners' lives right up to the last second. Prisoners were forced to march hundreds of kilometers or travel crammed into open train cars in the depths of the harsh Central European winter of 1944-45. They had virtually no food, no water, no adequate clothing or shelter.
It's driven onward.
Driven onward until they dropped. The extreme cold, coupled with the starvation and exhaustion they were already suffering, ravaged their weakened bodies. Typhus, dysentery, pneumonia spread like wildfire. And those too weak to continue, who collapsed by the roadside or in the trains, they were often shot immediately by the SS guards or left to die. It was a final, brutal act of extermination through attrition, deliberately designed to reduce the number of survivors who could testify.
So even liberation wasn't guaranteed if you survived the initial march.
Not at all. Historically, this reflects the 1945 death marches in their full, horrifying scale. As the Soviet armies advanced relentlessly from the east, the Nazis, determined to hide their crimes and prevent prisoners from falling into Allied hands alive, forced hundreds of thousands of prisoners westward from camps like Auschwitz, Stutthof, Gross-Rosen.
It wasn't a rescue mission.
Absolutely not. It was a continuation of extermination by other means. These marches led to massive death tolls from disease, summary shootings, and the harsh winter conditions. Already weakened prisoners succumbed in droves, and those who couldn't keep up were shot on the spot without a second thought. For many, these final days and weeks of the war were just as deadly, if not more so due to the chaos, as the peak of the camp operations.
Unbelievable cruelty right to the very end. And yet, amidst all this horror, this absolute despair, we see these tiny flickers of faith, as the source calls them.
Moments of unexpected humanity.
Spiegelman shares how small miracles, like a kind priest's words, could spark flickers of faith. Vladek recounts meeting a Polish priest on a train who gives him hope, tells him his prisoner number signifies good luck in Hebrew numerology.
A small thing, but potentially huge in that context.
Exactly. In an environment utterly devoid of humanity, systematically stripped of compassion, a simple act of kindness, maybe a shared potato, a comforting word from a stranger, or this priest's unexpected compassion could feel monumental. It momentarily reaffirms the possibility of human goodness, doesn't it?
It provides a psychological anchor, a desperately needed boost to the will to live. It's a reminder that not all humanity was lost, even if only for a fleeting moment in a sea of darkness.
These small acts were truly remarkable, considering the pervasive inhumanity. What were conditions like in camps like Dachau, where Vladek ended up near the end?
Appalling. Absolutely appalling. As prisoners from the evacuated eastern camps were forced westward, the existing camps in Germany proper, like Dachau, Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, became severely overcrowded. This massive influx of starving, sick people, combined with a total breakdown in supply lines as Germany collapsed,
Led to catastrophe.
utter catastrophe. Rampant disease, especially typhus, spread uncontrollably. Extreme starvation became even worse. Sanitary conditions completely deteriorated. So even as liberation was approaching, sometimes just days or weeks away, these concentration camps became more lethal than ever. A final grim testament to the Nazi regime's dying, nihilistic cruelty.
And this connects directly back to that core idea of survival's ongoing battle, the trouble's just beginning. What are those long-term battles survivors face beyond the immediate physical recovery?
Oh, they are immense and varied. Psychologically, many survivors grapple with profound wounds for the rest of their lives. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is common, manifesting as nightmares, flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, chronic anxiety, hypervigilance. Survivors' guilt, why did I live when so many others died, can be a crushing burden.
The emotional scars.
Deep emotional scars. The profound loss of family, friends, entire communities leaves a void that never truly fills. Many struggled with forming relationships, trusting others again after experiencing such betrayal and inhumanity. And physically, the long-term health consequences of malnutrition, disease, and abuse could linger for decades.
So the fight for life didn't end with Liberation Day.
Not at all. It simply changed form. It became an internal struggle for peace, for meaning, for rebuilding a shattered life, for coping with memories that could never be erased. A struggle that, for many, would last their entire lives. Vladek's troubles were just beginning because the hardest part, in some ways, was learning how to live after surviving hell.
That puts his statement in such a powerful, heartbreaking perspective. Okay, like, subscribe, and share for more updates, and we'll continue to the next chapter. All right, we're nearing the end of Vladek's wartime narrative with Chapter 4, Part 2, Saved. Liberation finally arrives, the moment they must have dreamed of, hoped against hope for.
The end of the immediate nightmare.
Yes, but as the chapter makes clear, it's not the simple, joyous Hollywood ending one might imagine. Spiegelman portrays it as fragmented, complicated, and fraught with new, unexpected challenges. It emphasizes again how the end of active persecution did not, for many survivors, mark an immediate return to peace or normalcy.
It's a critical transition, isn't it? From the absolute horror and, in a strange way, the structure of the camps, to the confusing, chaotic, often painful reality of post-war Europe. Freedom, but freedom into what?
Exactly, freedom into ruins. Historically, this ties directly to spring 1945, the period when Allied forces were liberating camps across Germany and Austria. What did the liberators actually find?
They encountered scenes that shocked even hardened combat soldiers to their core. U.S. forces liberating Dachau, British forces liberating Bergen-Belsen, Soviets liberating Auschwitz earlier. They found stacks of unburied corpses, emaciated, skeletal prisoners barely alive, gas chambers, crematoria, unspeakable evidence of systematic atrocity.
Things they couldn't have imagined.
Things that defied comprehension. Their immediate actions involved providing emergency medical care, food, trying to prevent the spread of disease, which was still rampant, burying the dead, and attempting to restore some semblance of order amidst the chaos, often with immense emotional difficulty for the soldiers themselves. These scenes were seared into the memories of the liberating troops and profoundly impacted the world's understanding of the war and Nazi brutality once the news got out.
And Mouse portrays this liberation arriving in fragments. Why fragmented? Why wasn't it a single, clean event?
Because the war ended differently in different places at different times. Some camps were liberated directly by advancing Allied armies. In other cases, the Germans abandoned camps or marched prisoners away just before the Allies arrived. Some prisoners escaped during the chaos of the final days or marches. There was no single universal moment of joyous liberation for everyone simultaneously.
It was messy.
Incredibly messy, piecemeal, and often terrifying even in liberation. Freedom often came with an overwhelming sense of loss, the realization of who hadn't survived, an immense uncertainty about the future. Where do you go? Who is still alive? What world is left?
So, finding moments of safety, like Vladek finding a safe barn with supplies left by fleeing Germans, or the initial reunions with other survivors, These seem like simple joys, basic needs met.
And they were profound moments of relief, undoubtedly.
But they were always shadowed by loss and uncertainty, weren't they? Finding shelter was an immediate primal need after years of constant threat and exposure. Reunions were deeply emotional, but often incomplete, instantly clouded by the realization of who wasn't there, the permanent absence of lost loved ones. Vladek still doesn't know Anja's fate for sure at this point.
Right. Those moments of joy were irrevocably tinged with an underlying grief, the trauma of the recent past, and the immense difficulty of processing what had just happened. There was no decompression chamber.
No. And Vladek's specific actions upon liberation, as depicted, really exemplify his pragmatic, resourceful nature, don't they? Even in that moment of profound emotional upheaval, he's thinking ahead.
Securing food, finding shelter, assessing the situation. Always practical.
Always practical. But the source emphasizes that the road back is fraught with sickness and displacement. What were those immediate post-liberation challenges?
They were immense. Physically, survivors were ravaged. Many were suffering from severe malnutrition, tuberculosis, typhus contracted in the camps or on the marches, untreated injuries. Paradoxically, sometimes reintroducing food too quickly after prolonged starvation could be dangerous, even fatal refeeding syndrome.
So even help could be dangerous.
In some cases, yes, if not done carefully. Psychologically, they carried immense trauma, as we've discussed: PTSD, survivor's guilt, anxiety, depression, and inability to trust anyone. The world felt alien and threatening.
And where did they go? Displacement was huge.
Exactly. This period was characterized by the chaos of displaced persons navigating post-war Europe. Millions were homeless, stateless. Famine was widespread in many areas because agriculture and distribution networks were destroyed. Infrastructure, roads, railways, cities lay in ruins. There was a desperate lack of information about missing family members, leading to agonizing, often fruitless searches across the continent.
A continent in chaos.
Truly, millions of people, Holocaust survivors, refugees fleeing conflict, former prisoners of war, forced laborers were on the move, crammed into displaced persons, DP camps set up by the Allies, trying desperately to find homes, family, or safety in a shattered world.
And yet, through all this unimaginable chaos and suffering, Vladek's resourcefulness shines. That core trait adapts again.
His inherent ingenuity, his meticulous nature, his drive seen in his pre-war business, then twisted into survival skills in the ghettos and camps, now become tools for forging a new, stable existence in this post-war wasteland.
How so?
We see him finding odd jobs, maybe using his language skills again, bartering for necessities, navigating the complex bureaucratic systems being set up for displaced persons, slowly, painstakingly accumulating resources, always thinking strategically, rebuilding his life step by step, as the source says. It's a testament to his indomitable, almost relentless will to not just survive, but to regain control and security.
That search for security seems paramount. And the search for lost family was a huge part of this period for all survivors, right?
Monumental and often heartbreaking. Survivors would travel across Europe, sometimes on foot, plastering handwritten missing posters with names and photos on notice boards in DP camps and train stations. They'd pore over lists compiled by relief organizations like the Red Cross. They'd follow every rumor, clinging to any shred of hope.
And the outcome?
For many, tragically, this desperate search ended in the devastating confirmation of loss. Finding out definitively that parents, siblings, spouses, children had perished, this added another layer of profound grief to their already immense suffering. The war's end truly was a beginning, not an ending. For these survivors, the beginning of this long, arduous, painful process of rebuilding lives from the absolute ashes.
This chapter really reminds you, the listener, that the end of war isn't the end of suffering. It's often the beginning of a different, quieter, but equally profound kind of struggle.
The struggle to live again.
Yeah. It asks, how do you begin to heal? How do you rebuild a life when the very foundations of your world have been utterly destroyed? When the ghosts of the past, the faces of the lost are ever present? It's such a poignant exploration of resilience, not as some quick rebound, but as this painstaking, lifelong, often incomplete process of finding meaning, connection, and safety amidst profound, irreparable loss.
A deeply moving chapter.
Incredibly. Okay, everyone, like, subscribe, and share for more updates, and let's continue to our final chapter of Vladek's story. And so we arrive at the final chapter of Vladek's narrative within Noose. Chapter 5 of Part 2, The Second Honeymoon. It brings us full circle, in a way, back to the theme of Vladek and Anja's relationship.
But it underscores immediately that nothing can ever truly be the same after such an ordeal.
Absolutely not. It's about building a new life together, finally reunited, but the shadows of the past are never far behind. That title itself, The Second Honeymoon, mirroring the pre-war chapter, The Honeymoon, but sounding so different now. It's steeped in irony, isn't it?
Deep irony. It highlights the profound and permanent changes wrought by the Holocaust on Vladek and Anja's lives, their health, their personalities, and their relationship. It's a testament, yes, to their enduring bond that they found each other again and rebuilt a life.
But it's also a stark, constant reminder of the immense, irretrievable cost of their survival. The first honeymoon was full of hope and innocence. The second is shattered by unimaginable loss and trauma.
That irony is palpable throughout. This chapter covers the post-war period, Vladek and Anja reuniting, likely in a DP camp initially, then moving to Sweden for a time, and eventually immigrating to America. This time frame, roughly 1945 into the early 1950s, was a crucial period for refugees and Jewish survivors across Europe.
What was that process like? Finding refuge, immigrating?
Life in the displaced persons camps, even in relatively safe places like Sweden, which took in many survivors, was often temporary, uncertain, lived in limbo. Immigration, particularly to the U.S. or Palestine-Israel, became the goal for many who felt they couldn't or wouldn't return to their devastated home countries in Eastern Europe.
Was it easy to immigrate?
Not at all. Historically, the process and challenges of immigration for Holocaust survivors were immense. There were restrictive quotas in many countries, including the U.S. bureaucratic hurdles were significant, getting papers, proving identity when everything was lost, language barriers were obvious, and then there was the sheer difficulty of starting completely anew in a foreign land, often arriving with nothing but the clothes on their backs and profound emotional wounds. They had to navigate new cultures, find work, build new communities, all while carrying the immense, unshakable weight of their past.
So Vladek and Anja are back together in Sweden, then America. That journey symbolizes their effort to find a new beginning, right?
Definitely. The move to America particularly signifies that classic search for a fresh start, for safety, for opportunity, a place supposedly free from the immediate horrors and ingrained anti-Semitism of Europe. It's an attempt to literally cross an ocean to escape the past.
But does it truly deliver? Can you ever really escape something like that?
Well, for Vladek and Anja, America offered physical safety and the chance to rebuild materially, which they did. But as Mouse makes clear, the past wasn't something that could simply be left behind on the shores of Europe. It traveled with them, it was inside them, and it manifested in new, subtle, and sometimes not so subtle forms in their new life.
And the source details the nature of these lingering shadows. Lost children, health woes, and strained bonds with their son. Let's unpack those.
The lost children refers primarily, devastatingly, to Rishu, their first son, whose fate we learned about earlier. His loss remained an open wound, a constant aching pain that never fully healed, casting a long shadow over their lives and their relationship with their second son, Art, who was born after the war, the ghost child.
Always there. And the health woes.
These weren't just the usual ailments of aging. They were often physical ailments directly attributable to the years of extreme privation, abuse, disease exposure, and chronic stress they suffered in the ghettos and camps. Heart problems, diabetes, lung issues. The body keeps the score, as they say. The trauma manifested physically as well as psychologically.
And the profound and long-term effects of the Holocaust on survivors and their families were pervasive, right? Extending far beyond those immediate physical dangers.
Absolutely. As we touched on before, many suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, nightmares, flashbacks, chronic anxiety, hypervigilance, difficulty sleeping. Survivor's guilt was a common and crushing burden. Why me? Why did I live when my parents, my siblings, my friends died? Difficulty forming trusting relationships or maintaining existing ones could stem from that fundamental loss of faith in humanity or from the sheer emotional numbness that can follow trauma. These effects often cast a long, dark shadow over survivors' lives, impacting their parenting, their marriages, their ability to feel joy. And tragically, these effects were often passed down, consciously or unconsciously, to the next generation.
Which brings us to the strained bonds with their son, Art. This seems crucial to Mellis. How does this directly reflect the burden of their past? How does it become intergenerational trauma?
It's central to the entire project of Mouse. The parents' experience as Vladek specifically, but also Anja's deep depression and eventual suicide, which occurs before the main narrative frame begins but haunts it, shaped their parenting profoundly. Vladek's survival mechanisms, his hoarding, his anxieties, his rigidness, his prejudices, his inability to waste anything, his difficulty expressing affection, these were all coping mechanisms born from unimaginable trauma.
Necessary then, maybe, but difficult now.
Exactly. They became ingrained personality traits that made him, frankly, a difficult father for Art to deal with in the relative comfort and safety of post-war America. Art struggles immensely with his father's quirks, his seemingly irrational behaviors, his casual racism, his controlling nature. He loves him, but he's also deeply frustrated and sometimes ashamed. That strain, that gap in understanding, that emotional inheritance is intergenerational trauma in action.
And this ties into the idea that memory itself, while essential for bearing witness, becomes this heavy, heavy burden for survivors like Vladek. How does his recounting of his story to Art become part of this burden for both of them?
For Vladek, telling the story means reliving the past. It's intensely painful, clearly dredging up immense grief, guilt, anger, sorrow. You see him physically falter sometimes during the telling, but maybe it's also necessary for him, a way to ensure it's not forgotten, a way to connect with his son, however fraught that connection is.
And for Art?
For Art, listening is an overwhelming responsibility. It's filled with empathy, horror, fascination, but also frustration. He knows he can never fully grasp the depth of his father's suffering, never truly understand what it was like. He feels the weight of needing to get the story right, to honor it, the act of creating Maoist, the interviews, the drawing. It becomes this complex, painful, necessary exchange of memory, pain, and attempted understanding across a generational divide widened by trauma.
But through this difficult process, Vladek leaves a profound legacy, doesn't he?
Absolutely. He leaves a testament raw, unflinching, sometimes contradictory to human endurance, to love, to the horrors of prejudice, and to the indomitable, if scarred, will to survive. And Mouse itself, the book Art creates from this testimony, ensures that Vladek's story, and by extension the stories of millions like him whose voices were silenced, is not forgotten.
Yeah.
It transforms this intensely personal tragedy into a universally accessible, profoundly powerful work of art that demands remembrance and reflection. Its legacy extends far beyond the Spiegelman family. Historically, the Holocaust claimed over 6 million Jewish lives and countless other victims. Works like Maoist fundamentally reshaped global awareness of genocide, making the abstract horrifyingly concrete.
This final chapter really challenges you, the listener, to consider that for survivors like Vladek and Anja, the journey never truly ends. Liberation wasn't the finish line. Healing, if it comes at all, is a lifelong, often incomplete process.
The echoes are always there.
Always. The echoes of the past profoundly shape the present and the future, particularly for their families. It asks us, how do we honor the stories of those who endured? What responsibility do we have to listen, to remember, to learn? And what lessons do we carry forward from their unwavering, yet deeply scarred resilience? Their lives are not just history lessons, they are living testaments, and perhaps a vital call to vigilance in our own time.
A powerful place to end the narrative part of our discussion.
It really is. Okay, everyone, like, subscribe, and share for more updates. We're going to wrap up our deep dive with some final thoughts right after this. #outro. So as we conclude this extensive deep dive into the complete Mayas, wow, we've really journeyed through Vladek and Anja's harrowing experiences, haven't we?
We really have. It feels like we've walked alongside them, in a way.
Yeah. We've traced the arc of their survival, right from that subtle creep of anti-Semitism in 1930s Poland, through the tightening noose of the ghettos, into the unimaginable horrors of Auschwitz itself, and finally onto that complex, painful path of liberation and trying to rebuild a life utterly shattered by loss and trauma.
We've seen Vladek's incredible, sometimes morally ambiguous resourcefulness.
Yeah.
We've felt Anja's quiet strength and profound suffering. And we've witnessed Spiegelman's raw, unvarnished portrayal of intergenerational trauma, how the parents' experiences continue to echo and resonate in the son's life.
It's so unflinching.
It really is.
Yeah.
What stands out most to me, thinking back over our discussion, is how Mouse doesn't just present history as a series of facts and dates. It invites you, the listener, the reader, to actually experience the weight of memory, the burden of it, and the enduring, often difficult and complicated power of the human spirit.
It asks us to bear witness, doesn't it? Not just to the historical facts, which are vital, but to the profound emotional and psychological impact of those facts on real human beings.
Exactly. It closes that distance between history and human experience.
And here's where I think it gets really interesting and maybe uncomfortable, but necessary. This deep dive into Maoist isn't merely a recounting of history. It's not just about something that happened back then. It functions as a mirror. It forces us to confront not only how far humanity can fall, the depths of cruelty, indifference, and systematic hatred it's capable of.
Which is terrifying to acknowledge.
It is, but it also shows the extraordinary resilience that can emerge even from those deepest pits of despair. the will to live, the importance of connection, and the raw honesty of Art Spiegelman's work, including his own struggles and ethical dilemmas in telling the story, challenges us to look inwards, not just at the past, but at our own capacity for empathy, for understanding, and perhaps most importantly, for vigilance in the face of rising hatred today.
And this raises that crucial question, Emma, connecting it to the bigger picture. The source material we used explicitly mentioned that discussions today, even in, say, 2025, about rising intolerance, about prejudice, about the dehumanization of the other, they echo these critical lessons from Maoists. The patterns feel disturbingly familiar sometimes.
Sadly, yes.
So what does this all mean for us today, right now, as you, listening, reflect on Vladek's story? How do the individual choices depicted in Maoist choices made in the face of escalating hatred, choices about complicity or resistance, choices about who to trust, who to help, who to ignore, how do those inform our vigilance in the present moment?
Yeah, how does the insidious nature of systemic oppression, the way it starts small, the way Vladek experienced it with boycotts and restrictions before the ghettos even happened, how does understanding that process inform how we look at the world now?
The meticulous documentation in Maoist, the step-by-step descent into hell, isn't simply historical preservation, is it? It's a stark warning. It's almost a guide, tragically, to recognizing the early signs of encroaching darkness, the normalization of hate in our own world, in our own communities.
So, maybe the final thought for you, listening, is this. What specific lessons from Vladek and Anja's journey, from their suffering and their resilience, do you believe are most critical for us to carry forward into our own lives, our families, our communities, our societies?
What actions, big or small, does the story compel you to consider or perhaps reevaluate in your daily interactions, in your consumption of news, in your broader awareness of prejudice and injustice around you?
That's something heavy but important for you to mull over long after our conversation ends today.
Food for thought, definitely.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us here on Book Podcast Zone for this profound, I think, essential deep dive into the complete Mouse.
Thank you for listening.